She was still crying when she lifted her chin and looked him dead in the eye. Not because she was weak, because she had traveled 900 miles on a promise written by a man she had never met, and she had just overheard him telling the station master he intended to put her right back on the return train before sundown. She had spent everything she owned to get here, and the man she was supposed to marry didn't even have the decency to tell her to her face. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to Silver Creek, Wyoming, 1883, and find out what really happened the morning Clara Bennett stepped off that train. The morning of July 14th, 1883, arrived in Silver Creek, the way most summer mornings did, hot before the sun had even cleared the ridge, the air already carrying the smell of dry earth and livestock, and the particular kind of stillness that settled over a town that had already decided what kind of day it was going to have. The 7:40 train from Cheyenne was 12 minutes late. Ethan Caldwell knew this because he had been standing on the far end of the platform for 40 minutes, and he had checked his watch 8 times. I was not the kind of man who checked his watch. He had never owned a pocket watch worth checking until his sister Margaret had pressed her late husband's silver one into his palm 2 Christmases ago and told him it was time he started caring about time again. He had not argued with her. Arguing with Margaret was something a man did once and then learned better. I was wearing his good shirt, the dark one with the collar that sat right. Margaret had ironed it that morning and told him he looked presentable, which from Margaret was the same as any other woman saying he looked handsome. He had not told her that. She would have taken it back. The platform was filling up. Silver Creek's train arrivals were something between a social event and a community inspection, and the townspeople had arranged themselves accordingly. The Hargrove women near the ticket window, the Delacroix brothers leaning against the freight office, old Tom Winfield on his bench with his hat pulled low, pretending to sleep. Pretending was what Tom did. Everyone knew he never missed a thing. Ethan positioned himself where he could see the arriving passengers without being easily seen himself. It was a habit. He had spent the better part of 4 years making himself difficult to look at directly, and not because he was vain about it. Because the town had opinions about Ethan Caldwell, and he had long since stopped wanting to hear them confirmed in their faces. The opinions were not cruel exactly. They were the kind that people delivered with pity wrapped around them like a coat. The kind where the words sounded kind, but the meaning underneath was something closer to, "We have given up on you, and we think you have given up on yourself, and isn't that a shame?" He had not given up on himself. He had simply contracted, like a field in drought, still there, still underneath, but drawn in tight and waiting for something he couldn't name. Margaret had named it for him 6 weeks ago across the kitchen table. "You are disappearing, Ethan," she had said. "Not all at once, but piece by piece, and I cannot watch it anymore." He had started to answer her. She had held up one hand. "I placed an advertisement," she said, "in the matrimonial register 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed was the kind that had shape and weight. "You did what," he said. It was not a question. It was a man discovering the ground had moved beneath his feet. "I described you honestly," Margaret said, which was either reassuring or terrifying, depending on what Margaret considered honest. Widower, ranch owner, quiet, serious, looking for a capable woman to share a life with. "I am not looking for anything," Ethan said. "I know," Margaret said. "That is why I looked for you." He had spent 2 full days being angry about it. Then a letter had arrived from St. Louis. A woman named Clara Bennett, 25 years old, had read the advertisement. She was not romantic about it. She had not used flowery language. She wrote the way someone wrote who had learned that words spent carelessly were words wasted. She said she was hardworking. She said she was practical. She said she had experience managing a household and was not afraid of difficulty. She said she had reasons for wanting a new life that were her own, and that she would explain them when she arrived if he was willing to hear them. She did not ask him to love her. She asked him to give her a fair chance. Ethan had read that letter 4 times. Then he had written back and told her the advertisement had been placed without his full consent, that he owed her honesty about that. and that if she chose to come anyway, he would meet her at the station and they could talk. He had not told Margaret he'd written back. Margaret had found out anyway. She always did. What Ethan had not written in that letter, what he had not told Margaret, had not told anyone, was the decision he had made before he sealed the envelope. He was going to meet Clara Bennett at this station. He was going to be decent about it. And then he was going to explain to her as kindly as he knew how that the arrangement wasn't going to work. That it wasn't about her. That he simply was not capable of being what she deserved. He was going to offer to cover her return fare. He was going to make sure she had a proper meal and somewhere safe to rest before the evening train. And then he was going to go home. He had the whole thing arranged in his head. Clean. Necessary. The right thing for both of them. He did not expect what happened instead. The train arrived with its usual noise and theater, the long scream of the brakes, the exhaled breath of the engine, the conductor's voice cutting through the platform crowd. People shifted and pressed forward. Children darted between adults. The Hargrove women straightened up to get a better view. Passengers began stepping down. Ethan watched the door of the second passenger car. He was not sure how he knew it was her. She came down the steps carrying a worn leather suitcase in one hand and a small Bible pressed against her ribs with the other arm. Her dress was blue faded, but clean, the kind of dress that had been carefully maintained rather than recently purchased. Her hair was pinned up neatly beneath a plain hat. She was not small. She was not the kind of woman who looked like she needed protecting. Exactly, there was a straightness in her spine that suggested she had stood up under things and kept standing. But her eyes were red. She had been crying. Not in this moment. She had stopped before she stepped off the train, had composed herself, had clearly made a decision about how she was going to arrive. But the evidence was still there, in the redness at the rims, in the faint swelling beneath her lower lashes. She stepped onto the platform. She looked around, and for one fraction of a second, Ethan saw it the way her eyes moved through the crowd. The way a person's eyes move when they are looking for a specific face, when they are carrying hope and trying not to hold it too obviously. He took one step forward. He never got to take the second. Well now, the voice belonged to Walter Grayson. And Walter Grayson did not have a quiet voice. He had the kind of voice that had spent decades being the loudest in every room, and it showed big and carrying and absolutely certain of its welcome. Walter Grayson was 61 years old, built wide across the shoulders, and had been the largest cattle owner in the county for going on 20 years. He was not exactly disliked. He was the kind of man a town tolerated because they needed him more than they were willing to admit, the kind of man who had bought enough goodwill that people forgot, until a moment like this, exactly what he was made of underneath it. How was standing with 3 of his ranch hands, men who laughed when Walter laughed and stopped when he stopped, which was its own kind of information about a person. He looked Clara Bennett up and down, the way a man looks at livestock he is considering buying and has already decided is not worth the price. "Another city woman," he said, loud enough for the platform to hear, loud enough that it was meant to be heard. "Come to try her hand at frontier life." A few people laughed. The Delacroix brothers. One of the Hargrove women quickly covered with a hand. Clara went still. She did not look at Grayson immediately. She finished her step off the train stairs. She set her suitcase down. She adjusted her grip on her Bible. And then, and only then, she looked at him. "That's correct," she said. Her voice was steady, not loud, but carrying in the way that voices carry when they have decided to. "I have." Grayson smiled the way men smile when they believe they are being generous by engaging with someone beneath them. "How long you give yourself," he said, "before you turn around and go back where you came from." He looked at the men beside him. "I say 6 weeks, being generous. What do you boys think?" "I'd say a month," one of them said. "She don't look like she's ever seen a winter." "A month," Grayson repeated, nodding as if this were reasonable. He looked back at Clara. "No offense intended, miss. Just an honest assessment. City women don't last out here. It's not a criticism. It's simply a fact." He was smiling when he said it. That was what Ethan noticed. He was smiling the way people smile when they have done something they have enjoyed and are coating it with the appearance of helpfulness, so that nobody can call them cruel. Clara looked at Walter Grayson for a long moment. She was not going to cry. Ethan could see that. Whatever crying she had done on that train, it was not going to happen here. She had used it up on something private, something that had happened before she arrived, and what was left in her now was not grief. It was something harder. "I traveled 900 miles, Clara said, because I am not afraid of things being difficult." She picked up her suitcase. "If that changes, I will let you know." She turned away from Walter Grayson, the way a person turns away from something that has already stopped mattering to them. She turned, and she looked directly at Ethan. He realized about a second too late that he had moved. That at some point during the exchange with Grayson, he had stepped off his position at the edge of the platform and was now standing closer than he had planned to be. She looked at him. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. Not a question. She had recognized him from something. A description in a letter, maybe. Something in his face or the way he had been standing. He did not know which. "Miss Bennet," he said. She held his eyes for a moment. Searching. And he understood in that moment that she already knew. Not the specific words he had planned, but the shape of what he had been thinking. She was not naive. She had not come 900 miles in ignorance of her situation. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, and there was something deliberate in that phrasing. Not "thank you for wanting me here," not "thank you for agreeing to this," "thank you for meeting me." As if she understood the distinction between what a man owed a person and what he had chosen to do, and she was acknowledging the choice without embellishing it. "Of course," Ethan said. Behind them, Walter Grayson said something to his men in a lower voice, and they laughed. Ethan turned his head. He looked at Grayson for 3 seconds without speaking, and something in that look was enough to make the laughter stop. Grayson returned the look. He shrugged. He walked away. Ethan turned back to Clara. "My wagon is this way," he said. "I'll take your suitcase." She looked at him for a moment, measuring something, deciding something. Then she extended the suitcase. He took it. They walked off the platform together, and the town of Silver Creek watched them go, and nobody said anything useful. The ride out to the ranch took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Ethan knew the exact time because he had driven it so many times, he had stopped needing to count. The way a man stops counting the steps between his bed and the door in the dark. He had planned what he was going to say. He had planned it clearly, organized. He was going to say it once and say it with kindness, and she was going to understand, and it was going to be over, and he was going to drive her back to town in time for the evening train. Instead, they drove in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. That was the thing that confused him. It was the silence of two people who did not feel the need to fill space with noise. He had not felt that in a long time. He had not felt comfortable being quiet beside another person, and he stopped counting. It had been years. Clara sat straight on the bench beside him. She watched the land. She did not say it was beautiful. She did not say it was big. She did not say the things that city people said when they saw open country for the first time and needed to make noise about it. She just looked at it the way you look at something you are trying to understand. She watched the grass, the way it moved. She watched a hawk riding the thermals above the eastern ridge for almost a full minute. After about an hour of driving, she said, "The grass on that far section is different from the grass here." He glanced at her. "Different how?" "Shorter," she said. "Paler, more dry." He looked toward the section she meant. She was right. "Too close to the creek bed," he said. "Floods in spring, burns off the roots." She nodded as if she was filing that information somewhere. Another mile of silence. "You said in your letter," she said, "that the advertisement was placed without your full consent." He said nothing. "I appreciated that you were honest about it," she said. "I wasn't going to lie to you," he said. "Not everyone would have bothered," she said. "They would have let me come and then found a way to make leaving seem like my idea." He looked at her sidelong. "I thought about it," he said. "The easier version." She turned her head slightly, not quite looking at him. "But you didn't do it." "No," he said. "Why not?" He thought about that for a moment. He gave her the true answer, even though it was not the comfortable one. Because you wrote me a letter that said you had reasons you would explain when you arrived, if I was willing to hear them. She was quiet. I thought it seemed unfair, he said, not to at least give you the chance to say them. She turned to look at the road ahead. He saw her throat move slightly. Mr. Caldwell, she said, I am going to tell you those reasons now, so that you have them before you say whatever it is you have been planning to say since we left that platform. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. My father died 8 months ago, she said. He left debts I did not know about. The house was sold. My position at the dress shop where I worked was given to the owner's niece when he learned I could no longer pay my rent in the building he also owned. She said this with no emotion, not because she didn't have any, but because she had already spent it on the train, and what was left was just the fact of it. I have a younger sister, Frances. She is 17. She is living with our aunt in Chicago. The aunt is not unkind, but she cannot support Frances past spring. I need to be able to help her. She paused. I came here because I saw a legitimate opportunity to build something. I am not romantic about it. I am not under the impression that marriage is easy, or that a stranger owes me tenderness. I am asking for a chance to work, to contribute, to build a life that allows me to eventually help my sister. She looked at him then directly. That is all I am asking. I am not asking you to love me. The road stretched out ahead of them. Ethan held the reins. He had his speech. It was still there, organized and ready, clean and reasonable and kind. He thought about the way she had looked at Grayson on that platform. Not with defiance exactly. With the patience of someone who had already looked at harder things than Walter Grayson and survived them. He thought about the letter she had written. The careful, economical sentences. No decoration. Just truth. I thought about what she had just told him, and about the fact that she had told it with no performance in it. No attempt to make him feel guilty. No manipulation. Just the facts laid out like tools on a workbench. He thought about the hawk she had watched. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "The house has 2 bedrooms. You'll take the one at the back. It gets the morning light." Clara Bennett said nothing. When he glanced at her, her jaw was tight. Not with anger. With the particular kind of effort a person makes when they are holding something in that is too large for the moment it has been handed to them. "Thank you," she said finally, quietly. "I'm not making any promises," he said, "about what this is or what it becomes." "I'm not asking for promises," she said. "I'm a difficult man," he said. "I've been told." "I've been told I'm stubborn," she said. He looked at the road. "Then we understand each other." "Good," she said. They drove the rest of the way in silence. But it was a different silence than before. When they arrived at the ranch, Ethan climbed down and walked around to help her down from the wagon. She was already climbing down herself, had already put her suitcase on the ground, but she paused and let him offer his hand for the last step, which was muddy from yesterday's irrigation. She took his hand for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she stood in the yard and looked at what she had arrived at. He watched her look. He knew what she was seeing. He had lived with it long enough that he had stopped seeing it properly, the way a person stops seeing the thing that is always in their peripheral vision. But through her eyes, standing there watching her, he tried to see it fresh. The main house needed painting. The front step had a board that needed replacing. The barn door hung slightly wrong on its top hinge. The kitchen garden was overgrown and unharvested, the remnants of last season's planting gone to seed and tangle. The fence along the south pasture had a section that had been propped back up with a stick rather than properly repaired. She looked at all of it. He waited for disappointment. She said, "How long has it been like this?" 3 years, he said. Then, because he was being honest, maybe 4. She looked at the garden longest. "Did you have help before?" "My wife," he said. "She managed the house. The garden was hers." He had not said the word wife out loud to a stranger in a long time. It felt strange in his mouth, like a word in a language he had mostly stopped speaking. What was her name? Clara asked. He looked at her. Nobody asked that. Not anymore. The town had known Anna. They did not ask Ethan about her the way you don't ask a man to walk through a door you know is painful. Anna, he said. Clara nodded once. Not too many words around it. Not too much sympathy. Just the acknowledgement. She had good taste, she said. The garden is in a good position, south-facing, good drainage. He said nothing. She picked up her suitcase. Would you show me the back bedroom? He showed her. She thanked him. She set her suitcase down. She looked out the window which faced east, he had said morning light, and she was quiet for a moment, in that way that people are quiet when they are making a decision about something they cannot undo. I'll start on the garden tomorrow, she said. If that's all right. It's all right, he said. He went back outside. He stood at the edge of the yard for a long time. He was not sure what had just happened. I was not sure why he had said what he had said about the back bedroom and the morning light, instead of saying the thing he had organized so carefully during the days before she arrived. He told himself it was one night. He would give her one night, and in the morning he would be clearer about it, and he would find the right words then. That was what he told himself. He was already not quite believing it. The first morning Clara was awake before him. He came out to find the kitchen fire, already going. Coffee already on, and Clara standing at the kitchen table, reading through a stack of ledger books that had been sitting at the back of the shelf for 2 years collecting dust. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. Good morning. Coffee is ready. He looked at the ledgers. I found them on the shelf, she said. I hope that's all right. I wanted to understand what the ranch looks like on paper before I looked at it on the ground. He walked to the coffee. He poured a cup. He looked at the ledgers. And she turned one of them toward him and pointed to a column of numbers. You've been running at a loss on the south pasture for 3 consecutive seasons. The cattle numbers. You're maintaining there are too high for the water access. You're supplementing their water costs, which is eating into the profit from the rest of the herd. He looked at the numbers. He knew those numbers. He had looked at them and not looked at them for 3 years, which was different from not knowing what they meant. If you shifted the younger cattle north, she said, where the creek access is better, and reduced the south count by about a quarter, you'd cut your water cost significantly before winter. The north pasture has a fencing problem, he said. I saw that coming in, she said. How much fence line needs replacing, he told her. She did math in her head. He could see it happening. Is there someone in town who does fencing work at a fair rate? He told her about the Vasquez brothers who did decent work for a decent price. She nodded. Would you be opposed to me writing up a cost comparison? What you'd spend on the fencing versus what you'd save on the water cost and the cattle loss. He looked at her across the kitchen table. He had been a rancher for 20 years. His father before him. He had never had someone sit across a table from him first thing in the morning and talk about his ranch the way she talked about it. Not like a problem to be solved, not like something failing, but like something that could be made to work if you looked at it right. Fine, he said. She nodded and turned back to the ledger. He drank his coffee, and he thought about Walter Grayson on that platform, and he thought about the women of Silver Creek who would be talking this morning about the city woman Ethan Caldwell brought home. He thought about how none of them were sitting at his kitchen table at 6 in the morning, doing math about his water costs. He went out to start the morning chores. By mid-morning, Clara had the kitchen garden cleared of the worst of the dead growth. She had found tools in the barn without asking him where they were, which meant she had looked until she located them, which meant she was the kind of person who found what she needed without requiring someone else to hand it to her. He was fixing the south fence post when Margaret arrived. Margaret Caldwell was 53 years old and had not, in Ethan's experience, ever once done a thing without complete certainty that it was correct. She arrived driving her own buggy, which she drove the way she did everything directly and without apology. She climbed down and looked at the house, and then at the garden, and then at Clara. Clara had not heard her arrive. She was pulling dead matter from around the base of what might, with encouragement, become tomatoes again. Miss Bennet, Margaret said. Clara stood. She turned. She looked at Margaret with the same direct assessment she had given everything else since she arrived. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said. "Just Margaret," Margaret said. "I put you in this situation. I believe I owe you a first name." She looked at the garden. "You found the tools." "In the barn," Clara said. "Third peg on the left from the door. Good quality. Well cared for." Margaret looked at Ethan, who had appeared at the fence line, and he could see in her face the particular expression she had when she was trying not to look pleased with herself. "She found the tools," Margaret said. "I heard," Ethan said. "On her first morning." "I heard that too, Margaret." Clara looked between them with an expression that was not quite a smile, but contained the acknowledgement that she understood she was watching something that had a long history behind it. "Would you like to come inside?" Clara said to Margaret. "There's still coffee." "I'd like that very much," Margaret said. Ethan watched his sister follow Clara Bennett into his kitchen. He went back to the fence post. He worked for a while. The morning was heating up. He could hear faintly his sister's voice from inside the house, and then Clara's response, and then Margaret's laugh, the real one, not the polite one, which was a sound he hadn't heard in some time, and which meant something. Margaret did not laugh, the real laugh, for people she did not respect. He drove the fence post into the ground. He thought about Clara at the kitchen table with the ledgers. He thought about the hawk on the thermals. He thought about the way she had said Anna had good taste about the garden, and the way she hadn't pressed him further, had left the space around that word exactly where it needed to be. He was not going to send her away. He had known it on the wagon. He had simply not said it to himself until now, standing at a fence post with the sweat on his collar and his sister's real laugh coming out the kitchen window. He was not going to send her away. He didn't know what that meant yet. He didn't know what she would think about it if he told her. He didn't know if it was the right thing, or just the thing that felt right, which were not always the same. But Clara Bennett had traveled 900 miles and arrived with a worn suitcase and a family Bible and a clear accounting of what she needed and what she wasn't asking for. The least he could do was be honest with himself. He picked up the next fence post. He had a great deal of work to do, and for the first time in a long time, that felt less like a burden, and more like something worth starting. The second morning, Ethan found a list on the kitchen table. Not a request, not a suggestion. A list written in Clara's small, precise handwriting on the back of one of the ledger pages she had already filled with calculations the night before. He picked it up, read it, set it back down, poured his coffee, picked it up again. It was a 3-week work plan for the ranch. Not vague, not general, specific. Week 1 fence repair on the north pasture, begin cattle rotation clear, and replant the kitchen garden. Week 2, roof assessment on the barn. Contact the Vasquez brothers for fencing estimate review, the remaining water contract with the land office. Week 3, begin soil preparation on the east field, assess the breeding records on the younger cattle, calculate projected winter feed costs against current hay storage. I was still reading it when Clara came in from outside, where she had apparently already been for some time, because her boots were muddy and her sleeves were pushed up past her elbows. "You've been out," he said. "Since 5, she said. She went to the basin and washed her hands. "The north fence is worse than I thought. There are 3 sections, not one, that need full replacement. I walked it this morning." He looked at the list. "You walked the north fence," he said, "in the dark. The sun was up by the time I reached the far end," she said, as if this were a perfectly reasonable correction. She dried her hands. She looked at the list in his hand. "I can do it differently if you prefer. Tell me what you'd change, and I'll adjust it." He set the list down on the table. He thought about saying something careful. About the fact that this was his ranch. About the fact that he had been managing it after a fashion for years. About the fact that she had been here for 1 day and had already walked his fence line at 5 in the morning and written a plan of action that covered the next 3 weeks. What he actually said was, "The Vasquez brothers are cheaper if you go to them directly. Don't send a letter. Ride in." Clara looked at him. "I don't have a horse," she said. "You can ride?" "Yes." "I'll saddle the gray mare," he said. "She's steady." Clara nodded once. "I'll go this afternoon." They'll try to quote you high first, he said. They do it with everyone they haven't worked with. Tell them Ethan Caldwell sent you. Then tell them the job. Then wait. She looked at him steadily. And the price will come down. It'll come down, he said. She nodded again and moved to the stove to check the coffee. He watched her for a moment, the efficient, unself-conscious way she moved in a kitchen that was not hers, that she had only inhabited for a single day. You cook? He asked. I cook, she said. I'm not fancy about it. I don't need fancy, he said. Good, she said. Sit down. He sat down. She put a plate in front of him. Eggs and salt pork and biscuits that she had apparently made while he was still asleep, because they were warm and they were good, which was not something Ethan's biscuits had been for the better part of 3 years. His biscuits had been functional at best, edible in the way that a man's cooking is edible when he has stopped caring about the difference. He ate. She sat across from him with her own plate and the ledger open beside her, and she ate and read at the same time, turning pages occasionally, and the kitchen was quiet except for that. It was the most domestic morning Ethan Caldwell had experienced since Anna died. He didn't say that. It wasn't the kind of thing you said to a woman who had been in your house for 24 hours. But he felt it in the back of his chest, in that particular hollowed-out place, like something pressing in from the outside, where before there had only been air. He finished his breakfast. He brought his plate to the basin. He picked up his hat from the hook. Miss Bennet, he said. She looked up from the ledger. The list is fine, he said. She held his eyes for a moment. Something moved through her expression, not surprise exactly, but close to it. Thank you, she said. She looked back at the ledger. I'll adjust the cattle rotation to start next week. The Vasquez job needs to come first, or the cattle move doesn't hold. Agreed, he said. He went out. He stood in the yard in the morning air and looked at his land, and for the first time in a long time, he did not see what was wrong with it. He saw what could be done with it. That was different. That was entirely different, and he was not sure what to do with that difference yet. He went to work. Clara rode into town that afternoon on the gray mare, and Ethan watched her go from the top of the north pasture where he was walking the fence line himself, doing his own assessment now that she had named the problem specifically, and made it impossible for him to keep half seeing it the way he had for 2 years. She sat a horse well, not showy, competent. The mare moved easily under her. He went back to the fence. He was on the third section, the worst one, when he heard a wagon coming up the drive. He recognized the sound before he saw it, the particular loose rattle of wheels on Tom Winfield's delivery wagon, which Tom used as an excuse to travel the county roads and gather information he then distributed without any apparent concern for accuracy. Tom pulled up and looked down at Ethan from the wagon box. Morning, Ethan. Tom. Heard you brought a woman home from the station. I met a woman at the station, Ethan said. I brought her home. Tom nodded as if this distinction were interesting. What's she like? Ethan looked at the fence post he was examining. She walked my north fence at 5 this morning and wrote a 3-week work plan for the ranch before I was out of bed. Tom was quiet for a moment. Huh, he said. Huh. Ethan agreed. Tom looked toward the house. Grayson's been talking. Ethan didn't stop what he was doing. I know. Saying she won't last. Saying you'd have done better to stay a widower than to bring a city woman in and let her fail at your expense. Walter Grayson, Ethan said, straightening up, has been waiting 3 years to buy my south pasture at a distressed price. What he wants is for me to fail. A woman working this ranch who doesn't fail is not something that suits his interests. Tom looked at him. You figured that out. Clara figured it out, Ethan said. She asked me this morning why Grayson would invest so much public energy in the failure of a woman he'd never met. Tom Winfield looked at the house again. Then he looked at Ethan. She's been here 2 days. 1 day and a morning, Ethan said. More or less. Tom picked up his reins. Well, he said. That's interesting. He clucked to his horses. I'll let you get on. He drove away. Ethan went back to the fence. He thought about Clara's question that morning, the one about Grayson. She had asked it the way a person asks a question when they already have the shape of the answer and they just want to confirm the edges of it. She had said, "Walter Grayson came to that platform specifically to humiliate me in front of the town. Not to protect you, not out of any particular concern. That means he had a reason to want me to turn around and go home before I ever set foot on this property. What does he want that my being here prevents?" Ethan had told her about the pasture, about the 3 times Grayson had made offers, about the debt rumors last year that Ethan was certain Grayson had started but could never prove. Clara had listened to every word. Then she had said, "Where do you keep your land records?" He had told her. She had found them. She had been reading them last night while he thought she was sleeping. He drove a new fence post into the ground. There was something clarifying about a person who saw the thing directly, who did not go around it or soften it or wait for someone else to name it first. He had been living with Grayson's pressure for 3 years and treating it like weather, something to endure rather than something to answer. Clara had been on his property for 1 day. She had already started answering it. Clara returned from town in the late afternoon with a fencing estimate from the Vasquez brothers that was, as Ethan had said, it would be considerably lower than their opening number. She also returned with something Ethan had not anticipated. She came into the barn while he was settling the horses for the evening, and she set a folded piece of paper on the workbench beside him. He picked it up, unfolded it. It was a page from the land office records. A copy. Official stamp. "What is this?" he said. "The water rights on the South Creek," she said. "There's a filing on it from 8 months ago. A preliminary claim registered under the name Grayson Cattle Company." Ethan went still. "He can't file on water that's been attached to this land for 20 years, Ethan said. "He can't file successfully," Clara said. "But he filed, and if you don't respond to a preliminary filing within 90 days, it moves to contested status, which means a hearing, which means legal fees you may not be prepared for." She looked at him. "The filing was registered 8 months ago." Ethan looked at the date on the stamp. 8 months ago. He had not known. Nobody had told him. He had not been to the land office in over a year because there had seemed to be nothing requiring his attention there, and because, if he was honest with himself, he had not been giving his attention to much of anything that required foresight. "How did you find this?" he said. "I asked the land clerk if there were any outstanding filings against this property," Clara said. He seemed surprised that no one had asked before. Ethan set the paper down. He was very quiet for a moment. "Ethan," Clara said, and it was the first time she had used his first name, and she did it without seeming to notice she had done it, which made it feel like something natural rather than something chosen. "If Grayson gets that water claim moved to contested status, how long can you operate the south pasture without the creek access?" 2 months, he said. "Maybe 3 if we dry feed. And the legal cost of a hearing. More than I have liquid right now." She nodded. She was not alarmed. She was thinking. He could see it the way her eyes moved slightly when she was working through a problem. Not side to side, but sort of inward, like someone consulting something deep rather than scanning for it. "The response to the filing doesn't have to be complicated," she said. "You have 2 decades of documented water use. You need a letter to the Territorial Land Office, citing your prior right with your deed attached. The clerk told me the response window closes in 17 days. 17 days. Yes. How do you know how to do that, he said. The filing, the response. She met his eyes. My father was a land surveyor, she said. Before his health failed, I kept his records for years. I know how these filings work. She paused. I didn't come here with nothing, Mr. Caldwell. I came here with what I know. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Grayson on the platform. All the public certainty. All the easy contempt. The city woman who wouldn't last. I thought about the fact that this city woman, on her first full day on his property, had found the legal weapon that Grayson had planted 8 months ago, and that had been quietly counting down toward detonation while Ethan drove fence posts and told himself the worst was behind him. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. Write the letter tonight. I'll go over it with you. We need to get it to the land office by week's end. He almost smiled. Not quite. but almost. The letter went out on Friday. Ethan had written it twice, and Clara had gone through the second draft with a pencil, not to change his words, but to make sure the legal language was exactly right. The right clauses, the right citations, the right framing. She sat beside him at the table while he wrote, and she said what to add and what to remove. And he did not find this galling the way he might have expected. He found it efficient, which was not the word he had expected to find himself using. When the letter was sealed, and he had it in his coat pocket to take to town, he said, "You're going to need to know things. About the ranch, about how things work here, the people, the history." She looked at him. "If you're going to be working alongside this," he said, "you're going to need to understand it fully, not just the ledgers." She said, "I agree." "So I'll tell you," he said, "when there's something to tell." She said, "I'll ask when I need to know something." "Fair," he said. That was the arrangement. It wasn't romantic and it wasn't formal. It was practical, the way a good tool is practical, made to fit the hand that would use it. And yet, there were moments that didn't fit neatly into practicality, and they arrived without announcement, the way most important things do. The first was on the 6th day. Ethan came in late from the south pasture, where he had moved a portion of the cattle according to Clara's rotation plan, a job that had taken 3 hours longer than expected, because 2 of the younger steers had decided that the concept of moving was offensive to them personally. He was tired in a way that went past his muscles, a ground-level, bone-deep tired that he recognized from his worst years, the kind that wasn't just the body's complaint, but something more total. He came into the kitchen, and Clara was at the stove. She looked at him once and said nothing. She did not ask how it went. She did not offer commentary. She put a plate on the table and a cup of coffee beside it, and she went back to the stove. He sat down. He ate. After a few minutes, she sat across from him with her own cup and the account book she was always carrying, and she read while he ate, and the kitchen was warm, and the food was good, and the silence was the kind that held a person rather than pressed in on them. After a while, he said, "The 2 youngest steers are idiots." She looked up from the account book. There was something in her face, the beginning of something that wasn't quite a smile, and was better for not being one yet. "How idiotic," she said. "Comprehensively," he said. The almost smile shifted. He felt it somewhere in the front of his chest, which was not something he had felt in a long time, and which he chose for now to leave unnamed. She went back to the account book. He finished his coffee. He said goodnight. She said goodnight. I went to bed, and he lay there for a while in the dark, and he thought about the letter going to the land office, and the Vasquez brothers starting on the fence Monday, and the cattle in the north pasture, and the kitchen garden that was already showing the first signs of something green, where Clara had worked the soil for 3 consecutive mornings. He thought about the fact that his house felt different. Not fixed. Not solved. Different. Like a room that had been closed a long time, and someone had opened the window. He did not know what to do with that yet. He went to sleep. The next twist came from a direction he hadn't watched. On the 8th day, Clara rode into Silver Creek for supplies. Ethan had given her a list and the money for it, and told her where to go and where not to. She knew the way. She didn't need his guidance on the road anymore. What he hadn't told her, what he hadn't thought to tell her, because it had become such a background fact of his life that he no longer registered it as something requiring warning, was about the women of Silver Creek. Not all of them, but the ones who gathered at Harriet Gaines's dry goods store on Tuesday and Friday mornings, which Clara arrived at on a Tuesday. He found out what had happened when Clara returned. She came in, set the supplies on the kitchen table, and stood there for a moment with her back to him, and he could see in the set of her shoulders that something had happened. "What?" he said. She turned around. She was not distressed. She was calibrating. That was the word. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was filing information in the right category. 3 women at the store, she said. Mrs. Gaines herself and 2 others. They were not unfriendly exactly. But, he said. They asked about our arrangement, she said. Whether it was formal. Whether we had married. When I said we had not yet, one of them said very kindly that this was the kind of situation that reflected poorly on a woman's character if it extended too long. She paused. And then Mrs. Gaines told me that Walter Grayson had been asking around about whether I had any family who might be contacted, about my situation in St. Louis. Ethan went very still. He's looking for something to use, Clara said. He has people in the county seat, Ethan said. He's found things on other people before. Is there something to find? Clara asked. Not accusingly, factually. Not about me, Ethan said. She looked at him. About me, she said, and it was not a question anymore. He waited. My father's debts, she said. He owed money to a grain merchant in St. Louis, a man named Alcott. The estate couldn't cover it. Alcott filed a claim against the estate, but there was nothing left to claim, so legally it was discharged. But it's on record. She met his eyes. If Grayson finds it and frames it as me coming here to escape debt as a woman with credibility problems, it will affect how the land office views your response filing. They can't reject a water rights response on the character of the applicant's household, Ethan said. They can't officially, Clara said. But this is a territory, not a court of law. The clerk who processes these filings is a man named Patterson. Do you know him? I know of him, Ethan said. Grayson has bought him dinner twice this year that I know of. Clara was quiet for a moment. We need the response to be airtight before Grayson gets to Patterson, she said. If there's any procedural reason to delay it or send it back for additional documentation, Patterson will find it. Ethan looked at her. She was standing in his kitchen, still wearing her riding coat, talking about land office procedure and territorial politics and the specific vulnerabilities of their legal position, with the focused intensity of someone who had been thinking about this for a while and was only now saying it out loud because she had enough pieces to say something useful. He said, You've been thinking about this since before I told you about Patterson. She said, Since the day I found the filing. He said, You didn't say all of it then. I didn't have all of it then, she said. I needed to go to town to get the rest. He looked at her for a long moment. He said, What do you need? She said, I need you to take me to see your deed, the original, and any documentation you have of the water use going back as far as it goes. He went to the box under the floorboard in the bedroom where he kept the papers that mattered. He brought them out. They spent the rest of that day and most of that night at the kitchen table, and Ethan talked, and Clara listened, and Clara asked questions, and Ethan answered them, and by the end of it, he had told her more about the history of that ranch, the real history. His father's first purchase, the droughts, and the good years, and the years in between, than he had told anyone in years. He had not planned to talk that much. It happened the way things happened when someone asked the right questions in the right order, and he realized partway through that it did not feel like being asked questions. It felt like being heard. That was a different thing. When they finally stopped around midnight, Clara closed the last folder and straightened the stack and set it aside and looked at the table for a moment. You have a strong case, she said. Thanks to you finding it, he said. She shook her head just slightly. The case existed before I found it, she said. You had everything. You just hadn't assembled it. He said, I hadn't been looking. She said quietly, I know. No judgment in it. He said, Why are you doing this? All of this. You've been here 9 days. You didn't sign on to fight my legal battles. She looked at him directly, and she said, Because if you lose this ranch, I have nowhere to go, and neither does Francis. And because it would be wrong for you to lose it. She paused. Both things are true. I'm not going to pretend one of them is more noble than the other. He held her eyes. He said, That's honest. She said, I said I would be. He nodded. He said good night. She said good night. He was halfway to his room when she said, Ethan. He stopped. She said, I didn't know your ranch would be like this. I didn't know you would be like this. A pause. I came here with a plan and a practical view, and I thought that was sufficient. I want you to know that I understand it's more complicated than that. He did not turn around. He said, So do I. He went to bed. He lay in the dark, and he thought about Anna, the way he sometimes let himself think about her at night, when the day was finished, the specific texture of her laugh, the way she moved through a room, the way the house had felt with her in it. He thought about how long he had been keeping the house exactly as it was when she left it. Not because he thought she was coming back. Because changing it meant it was over and over felt like something he couldn't hold. I thought about the fact that Clara hadn't changed the house. She had changed the ranch. There was a difference. He was not sure what the difference meant yet. But he lay there in the dark, and he thought that maybe the open window he had been feeling for 9 days, that particular quality of air, moving through something that had been still for too long, maybe he didn't need to name it yet. Maybe it was enough for now that it was there. 3 days later, something happened that knocked every other thought clean out of his head. I was in the barn when he heard the horse coming fast up the drive. Too fast for a casual visit. The kind of fast that meant news. He came out of the barn, and the rider was the Vasquez brothers' youngest son, maybe 14 years old, and the boy pulled up his horse and said, "Mr. Caldwell, my uncle says to tell you 2 men from the Grayson Ranch were at the land office in Sheridan yesterday. They were asking the clerk about your water filing." Ethan was very still. They were asking specifically about whether the response included original survey documentation, the boy said, relaying it carefully the way he had been told to. "My uncle says the clerk told them it did not. Not yet." The original survey documentation. Ethan turned and went to the house. Clara was in the kitchen. He came in, and she looked up and read his face in approximately 1 second. "What happened?" she said. He told her. She set down what she was holding. She stood up. She said, "Where is the original survey?" "I don't have it," he said. "It was filed with the territorial government when my father bought the land. It would be in the territorial records office in Cheyenne." Clara stood there. She said, "If Grayson gets there first, and there's any irregularity in the original survey, even a clerical one, even something minor, he can use it to delay your response, which tips the water claim into contested status." "Yes," Ethan said. She said, "Someone needs to go to Cheyenne." He said, "I can't leave the ranch right now. The Vasquez job starts tomorrow, and the cattle rotation isn't finished, and if I leave for 3 days," she said, "I'll go." He looked at her. She said, "I know what I'm looking for. I know the language. I know how to read a survey record." She met his eyes. "You stay and manage the ranch. I'll go to Cheyenne and get a certified copy of the original survey and bring it back in time to amend the response filing." He said, "You've been here 12 days. She said, "I know." He said, "Cheyenne is 2 days each way." She said, "I know that too." He looked at her for a long moment. She did not look away. He said, "If you go alone, Grayson's people may follow. They'll know you're going, or they'll find out. They'll know why." She said, "Then I'll move faster than they do." He looked at this woman 12 days on his property, 12 days in his house, 12 days of early mornings and ledger books and honest answers and not quite smiling, and he thought about Walter Grayson on that platform. The helpless city woman who wouldn't last the month. He thought about what Grayson had expected and what he had gotten instead. He said, "Take the bay. She's faster than the gray." Clara nodded. She said, "I'll be back before the response deadline." He said, "I know you will." He said it before he knew he was going to say it, and he meant it, every word. Clara left before dawn. Ethan heard her moving through the house at 4 in the morning, the quiet, deliberate sounds of someone trying not to wake another person, while also not wasting a single minute. He lay in the dark and listened to the sounds, the soft pull of a drawer, the brush of boots across the floorboard, the faint click of something metal. He did not get up. She did not need him to. That was already something he understood about her. The difference between what Clara Bennett needed and what most people assumed she needed were 2 entirely different things. He heard the back door close. He heard the bay mare respond to her in the barn, a low, recognizing sound, the kind a horse makes for someone it has already decided to trust. Then hoofbeats going south toward the Cheyenne road. Then nothing. He lay there for another hour before he got up, which was unusual for him, but the house had a different quality to it that morning, and he needed a moment to identify what that quality was. It took him longer than it should have. It was quiet. The house was quiet in the way it had been quiet for 3 years before 12 days ago, and he had forgotten that this was how it used to be. This specific total quiet, because in 12 days it had already become something he did not notice until it was gone again. He got up. He went to work. The Vasquez brothers arrived at 7 with a wagon full of lumber and post stock and 2 additional men who worked without commentary and moved fast. Ethan worked alongside them because that was how he ran things, not standing at a distance, supervising but in it, which the Vasquez brothers had always respected about him. They worked the north fence all day, and it was hard work, and it kept his hands busy and his mind from following the Cheyenne road south more than every hour or so. At noon, the older Vasquez brother, Ramon, 40 years old, built like he had been designed specifically for physical labor, handed Ethan a water jug and said, "The woman who came to see us, the one who negotiated the price." "Miss Bennett," Ethan said. "She knew what she was talking about," Ramon said. "I told her a number. She didn't argue. She just said, 'That seems high for 3 sections. I've priced comparable materials in Sheridan and labor runs about this much.' Gave me a number." He paused. "It was a fair number." "I know," Ethan said. Ramon looked at him for a moment in the direct, unembarrassed way that Ramon looked at things. "She's not what people in town are saying." "No," Ethan said. "She isn't." Ramon nodded, satisfied with this, and went back to work. The afternoon moved. The fence line grew. Ethan worked until his shoulders ached in a way that felt productive rather than punishing, which was a distinction he had forgotten the difference between. At 4 o'clock, Tom Winfield's wagon appeared on the drive again, and Ethan felt the particular tension that Tom's wagon had started to produce in him, because Tom only came when there was something to deliver, and Tom's deliveries lately had been the kind that required a decision afterward. How was right? Tom climbed down. He did not bother with preamble. Tom was a man who understood that preamble was a courtesy you extended when the news was good. "Grayson sent 2 men to Cheyenne," Tom said. "Left this morning. Bill Akers and that lawyer he uses from Sheridan fellow named Crane." Ethan looked at him. "They know," Tom said, "about the survey. Somebody at the land office here told them what your response was missing. Somebody who knew it was missing and knew why it mattered." Patterson, Ethan thought. "When did they leave?" Ethan said. "Early," Tom said. "Before sunup." Ethan calculated. Clara had left before 4. If Grayson's men left at first light around 6, she had a 2-hour lead. The bay was faster than most horses, but 2 hours was not a comfortable margin if the men behind her were riding hard and knew the road. "Does anyone know she went to Cheyenne?" Ethan said. "By now?" Tom said. "Probably." Ethan said nothing. Tom looked at him. "She know what she's looking for when she gets there?" "Yes," Ethan said. "And she can get it without the lawyer getting there first." "If she gets there first," Ethan said. Tom was quiet for a moment. "You trust her," he said. Not a question. The word settled in Ethan's chest in a specific way. He had not used it before, not consciously. Trust was a word he had been careful about for years, the way a man is careful about words that have already cost him something. "Yes," he said. Tom nodded. "Then you work the fence and you wait," he said. "Worrying about it from here won't change what she does in Cheyenne." He climbed back onto his wagon and drove away. Ethan picked up the post digger. He worked until dark. Clara did not return that night, which he had known she wouldn't. Cheyenne was 2 days south and she was making the trip efficiently, not impossibly. But knowing it and sitting in the kitchen alone at 9 o'clock with only the account books she had left open on the table were different experiences. He sat there longer than he needed to. He looked at her handwriting in the margins of the ledger page, the small specific numbers, the notations that were shorthand for longer thinking. He thought about what it meant that he could already read her shorthand 12 days in the same way you learn to read the handwriting of someone you have spent enough time with. He closed the ledger. He went to bed. He was up at 5. By mid-morning of the second day, the fence was finished. Ramon Vasquez walked the full line with Ethan testing posts and pronounced it solid, which from Ramon was the highest form of professional endorsement. They settled up, and the Vasquez brothers loaded their wagon, and when the younger one climbed up, he said, "Tell Miss Bennett the tomato seedlings need to go in before next week if she wants a fall harvest." Ethan looked at him. She asked me when she came to see us, the young man said, slightly defensive. About the kitchen garden. My mother grows them. I told her I'd find out. I'll tell her, Ethan said. He watched them go. He thought about Clara asking the Vasquez brothers about tomato seedlings while she was there to negotiate a fencing contract. While she was managing his legal problem, she was also simultaneously thinking about the kitchen garden. He did not know what to do with that information, except that it sat in him somewhere permanent, the way certain things do not loud but there. He went inside. He was eating lunch alone when he heard the horse. How was outside before he had consciously decided to be. She came up the drive on the bay, and the horse was tired, not dangerously, but visibly, the careful movement of an animal that had covered serious ground in short time. Clara was upright in the saddle, straight-backed, the way she was always straight-backed, but there was something in her jaw and around her eyes that told him the 2 days had not been simple. She pulled up. She reached into her coat and held out a folded document. Certified copy, she said. Original survey filed 1861 with the territorial recorder's stamp and 2 witness signatures. He took it. He unfolded it. It was real, clean, complete. He looked up at her. Grayson's lawyer got there 4 hours after I did, she said. He asked the recorder's office to place a hold on the document pending a competing inquiry. The recorder told him a certified copy had already been issued and there was nothing to hold. She paused. The recorder was a woman named Mrs. Elspeth Horn. She had the document ready in 40 minutes. She said she believed in doing things properly. Ethan looked at the document in his hands. He said, "Are you all right?" She blinked, as if the question surprised her. As if she had been so focused on the task that the idea of someone asking about her, rather than the outcome, had not occurred to her as a possibility. "I'm tired," she said, and I'd like to sit down." "Come inside," he said. She dismounted. He took the bay's reins. She did not argue, which told him exactly how tired she was, because Clara Bennett arguing over small courtesies was something he had already come to expect. He brought the horse in and settled her. When he came into the kitchen, Clara was sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had poured herself, and her coat was still on, and she was looking at nothing in particular with the vacant expression of someone whose mind had finally stopped running. He sat across from her. "Tell me the rest," he said. She looked at him. "Crane Grayson's lawyer, he found me at the boarding house that night, after the recorder's office closed." Ethan went still. "I was not threatening," she said. "He was the other kind, the kind that's worse. He was very polite and very reasonable, and he said that Walter Grayson was a patient man and a community-minded man, and that there were ways to resolve a water dispute that didn't require the land office at all. Private arrangements, fair compensation." She set down her cup. "He said it would be a shame if a water dispute complicated matters for a woman who was already in an uncertain situation. He mentioned your father's debt," Ethan said. "By name," she said. "He knew the merchant. He knew the amount. He knew the discharge date." She met his eyes. He did his research quickly. The kitchen was quiet. Ethan looked at the certified copy on the table between them. He said, "What did you tell him?" Clara looked at him steadily. She said, "I told him that the Caldwell water rights were 22 years documented and that we had just obtained the original survey certification and that Mr. Grayson was welcome to pursue any legal avenue he believed was available to him, and that I looked forward to seeing him at the land office when the response was filed." Ethan looked at her. She said, "Then I went back to my room and locked the door, and I did not sleep particularly well." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Clara." She looked at him. He said, "I am going to say something, and I need you to hear it plainly." She waited. He said, "What you did in Cheyenne, what you have done for the last 2 weeks, I would not have done it alone. Not because I couldn't, because I had stopped looking at the right things. You came here, and you looked at the right things from the first morning." He stopped. He was not a man who talked at length about what he felt, and he knew this, and he pressed through it because she had just spent 2 days riding to Cheyenne and back for a ranch that wasn't hers yet, and coming home tired with a document in her coat that she handed him before she asked for water. "I don't know what this arrangement is," he said. I know I told you on the wagon that first day that I wasn't making promises. I'm not going back on that. But I want you to know that I see what you're doing. And I don't take it lightly." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Thank you." Simple, direct, no performance around it. He nodded. She said, "File the amended response tomorrow. Don't wait." He almost smiled. He did not wait. They rode to the land office the next morning together, and Ethan filed the amended response with the certified survey attached, and the clerk, who was not Patterson, who was apparently unwell that day, which was its own kind of providence, stamped it and recorded it, and handed Ethan his copy with complete neutrality. On the way out, they passed Walter Grayson on the boardwalk. He had not expected to see them. That was clear. He had the look of a man who had been told a thing was handled, and had walked outside in the confidence of that, and had then encountered the evidence that it was not handled at all. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Clara. He said nothing. Clara looked at him the way she had looked at him on the platform. Not with anger, not with triumph, with the simple, steady acknowledgement of a person who has done what they set out to do and does not require an audience for it. She said, "Good morning, Mr. Grayson." Grayson said nothing. They walked to the wagon. Ethan helped her up. She took his hand without the precise calculation she had used the first time, which told him something. He was not sure yet what it told him, but it told him something. They drove back to the ranch. The threat for now was handled. But the real test had not yet started. It came without warning, the way the worst things do on a Tuesday morning in the third week of August. Ethan found the first steer at the eastern edge of the north pasture, standing apart from the others. Head low. Not eating. The posture of an animal that was telling you something with its body because it had no other language. He knew that posture. He had seen it before. 3 years ago, when a respiratory illness moved through his herd and killed 11 head before he understood what he was dealing with. The memory of it lived in his body the way bad memories do, not in his mind exactly, but in his gut, in the specific recognition that arrived before thinking did. He crossed the pasture fast. He checked the steer up close. The signs were clear. He stood in the pasture in the early morning and felt the specific dread of a man who has already lost something this way, and knows in the way that you know when a wound you have had before begins to open again exactly what he is looking at. He went back to the house. Clara was at the table with the account book. She looked up and read his face. "What?" she said. That was always how she said it. Not framed as a question, framed as a door she was opening. "6 steer in the north pasture," he said. "It's the same thing I had 3 years ago. Respiratory. It moves fast." She was already standing. She said, "How many are showing signs?" "One that I saw," he said. "Which means there may be others. They don't all show at the same time." She said, "Who in this county knows about cattle illness? Someone who's dealt with this specifically." He said, "Old Hector Reyes. He's got a spread 15 miles east. He lost 3 head to it last season and saved the rest. He's the only one who's managed it recently." She said, "Go get him." He said, "Clara." She said, "Ethan, go get him. I'll check the rest of the herd. Tell me the signs I'm looking for," he told her. Quickly. The posture, the eyes, the breathing pattern, the specific sound a sick one made, that was different from the others. She listened the way she listened to everything, completely without interruption, filing it. Then she said, "Go." He went. It took him 2 hours to reach Hector Reyes, and 2 more to ride back with him. When they arrived, Clara was standing at the fence of the north pasture with a piece of paper in her hand and an expression that he had not seen on her face before. Not panic, not distress, but the particular tightness of someone managing something larger than they had planned for, and doing it by sheer precision of attention. She came to the fence. She handed the paper to Hector Reyes without greeting him first, which would have been rude in any other context, but was not rude because she handed it to him, the way you hand a tool to someone whose skill you respect. "I've identified 6 showing symptoms," she said. "I've marked them. These are the ones I'm unsure about, 3 that are eating less, but showing no other signs yet. I didn't move any of them because I didn't know if that would spread it faster or slower." Hector Reyes looked at the paper. He looked at her. He looked at the paper again. He said in the particular way of a man reassessing something he had already formed an opinion about, "You marked 6. "Yes," she said. Where's the first one you found? She pointed. He looked. He said, That's the right 6. He looked at her again with something in his face that was closer to respect than surprise, though it contained both. The 3 you were unsure about, leave them separate, but don't move the others yet. You were right not to move them. He handed the paper back. Tell me what feed they're on. She told him. They stood at the fence and they talked. Hector Reyes and Clara Bennett, 2 people who had met 40 seconds ago, and Ethan stood back and watched and felt the dread in his gut shift into something that was not quite hope, but was the direction hope came from. Because the last time this happened, he had stood in this same pasture alone and not known what he was looking at until it was already too late. Hector Reyes spent the rest of the day on the Caldwell Ranch. He and Ethan treated the 6 steers. Clara managed the separation of the uncertain ones and kept the records that Hector Reyes needed, the timing, the dosage, the animal numbers, with the same focused accuracy she brought to the account books. By evening, they had a treatment plan in place. Hector Reyes was washing his hands at the barn basin when he said to Ethan, 3 years ago, you lost 11 head. 11, Ethan confirmed. This time. Hector looked at the pasture. You catch it early enough, you treat it right, you'll lose 2, maybe none. Ethan looked at him. Hector said, The difference is having someone watching. He looked toward the house where Clara had gone in to start supper. That woman of yours saw the signs this morning and had 6 animals identified and separated before you got back with me. That's not luck. That's attention. He dried his hands. He said, You should marry her. Ethan said nothing. Hector said that wasn't a question. He accepted supper, which Clara produced for 3 people in the time it would have taken Ethan to produce it for 1, and the 3 of them sat at the table, and Hector told stories about bad seasons and worse ones, and how to tell when a herd was really sick versus just unhappy. And Clara asked questions that Hector answered with the pleasure of a man whose knowledge was being genuinely valued, and Ethan sat between them and thought about the word that Tom Winfield had asked him about, and that he had answered without hesitating: trust. He had said yes without hesitating. He had not noticed until this moment that there was a word that came after trust that he had been edging toward without looking at it directly. He did not look at it directly now, but he knew it was there. Hector Reyes left after supper. Clara cleaned up. Ethan sat at the table. When she finished, she sat down across from him, and they both looked at nothing in particular for a moment, in the way of 2 people who have been through something together and are still coming down from the particular altitude of it. Clara said, We're going to lose at least 1. Probably 2, Ethan said. Hector said 2. I know. A pause. I'm sorry. He looked at her. Why are you apologizing? She said, Because I know what those cattle mean. Not just financially. I've been reading your records long enough to know which animals you've had for years. The one in the far corner, number 14, she's been on this property since your father's time. He said nothing. She said, I'm sorry, that's the one showing the worst signs. The kitchen was quiet. He said, She's had a good long run. His voice was steady. It was not as steady as he wanted it to be. Clara said, Yes, she has. She did not say anything else. She did not try to make it better or smaller or more manageable. She let it be what it was, which was a loss on top of a crisis, on top of 2 weeks of accumulated hard work. And she sat with him in it, the way you sit with someone when the thing they feel is real, and the only honest response is to not look away from it. He said after a while, You asked me once on the drive from the station if I was going to send you away. She looked at him. I didn't ask. I knew. You knew, he said. You had the look, she said, of a man who had rehearsed something. He looked at his hands on the table. He said, I had it all planned. What I was going to say. How I was going to say it. I thought it was the right thing. She said, What changed? He thought about it. He said, Grayson. She blinked. He said, when he stood on that platform and talked to you the way he did, the way he looked at you, something happened in me that I hadn't felt in years. He paused. I was angry. Not on principle. Personally angry. And I hadn't been personally angry about anything in a long time, because being personally angry means you care about something, and I had stopped caring about enough things for it to apply. He looked at her. That was the first thing. And then you turned around and looked at him and said what you said, and you picked up your suitcase, and you looked at me. He stopped. And I forgot the speech. Clara held his eyes for a long moment. She said, "That was the moment." "That was the moment," he said. She said quietly, "For me it was the wagon." He said, "Which part?" She said, "When you told me about the grass, the creek flooding the roots." She looked down at her hands. "You answered me like I was a person who had asked a real question. Not like someone you were tolerating. Not like someone you were managing, like someone worth answering." She paused. It had been a while since that had happened. He thought about what she had told him on that drive. The dress shop, the house, the debts, her sister Frances. All of it said without any attempt to use it as leverage, offered simply as information, as the truth of where she stood. He said, "Who was it back in St. Louis who stopped treating you like a person worth answering?" She was quiet. He waited. She said, "My father at the end. When the business was failing and he was frightened, he made decisions that he did not consult me. He did not consult anyone. I was a proud man, and pride became his primary strategy. And what was left when it collapsed was everyone else's problem to manage." A pause. "I managed it, because that's what I do. But it cost things." She looked up. "I came here because I wanted to build something I had a part in choosing. Not just something I was handed and told to maintain." He held that. He said, "This ranch, everything we've been doing, you're building it with me." She said, "I know." He said, "That's not nothing, Clara." She said, "I know that too." The lamp burned low between them. Outside, the cattle settled in the night pasture, the sick ones in their separated enclosure, the others moving slow and quiet in the dark. The fence the Vasquez brothers had set was solid against the wind. The certified copy of the original survey sat in the document box under the floorboard. The amended response filing was stamped and recorded at the land office. Everything they had built in 3 weeks was still standing. But what neither of them said, sitting across from each other in the quiet kitchen, was that Walter Grayson was not finished. Because men like Grayson were never finished. Not when something they wanted was still in someone else's hands. And the next morning, Ethan would find out exactly how far Grayson was willing to go. When he woke to the smell of smoke. The smell hit him before he was fully awake. Not the sharp, close smell of something burning inside the house. The other kind. The outdoor kind that carried on wind and arrived through window gaps and the spaces under doors. The wide, heavy smell of something large burning somewhere it shouldn't be. Ethan was out of bed and pulling on his boots before his mind had caught up to his body. He came out of his room, and Clara was already in the hallway. She had her coat over her nightgown and her boots on and her hair loose, and she was moving toward the back door with the focused urgency of someone who had also smelled it and had also already stopped sleeping because of it. "The barn," she said. "Not the barn," he said, because he knew the difference. The barn smell was hay and animal and old wood, and this was grass, dry grass, and the particular acrid underneath of something that had been encouraged. "The south field." She stopped. He went past her and out the back door. He could see it from the yard, the orange along the south ridge, not huge, not yet, but moving. Moving the way. Fire moves in dry August grass when the wind is coming from the northwest, which it was, which meant it was moving toward the south pasture fence line, toward the cattle enclosure, where the 6 steers were separated toward the barn. He was running before he had made any decision to run. He heard Clara behind him. He turned once and said, "The well, buckets, send up the alarm shot so the Vasquez brothers hear it. They're close enough." She didn't answer. She was already turning back toward the barn for the buckets. He trusted that she heard him. He trusted that she would do it. He ran. The fire was in the grass, not yet into the fence line, and he hit the edge of it with the first bucket of water in a place that would do the most good. The leading edge, the head of the fire, not the body of it, because fighting the body was how you lost. He had learned that from his father. You hit the head. You cut it off at what it was moving toward. The alarm shot cracked through the night behind him. He worked. The Vasquez brothers arrived in 20 minutes, which meant they had been moving the moment they heard the shot. Ramon came with 2 of his men, and they worked the line without instructions, because they understood fire, and they understood what it was moving toward. And the 5 of them fought the Southfield fire for an hour and 40 minutes before it was out. When it was done, Ethan stood at the edge of the burned grass in the early gray of morning and looked at what remained, 20 yards from the enclosure fence. That was how close it had gotten. He turned around. Clara was there. She had soot on her forearms, and her coat and her face, and she had been working the bucket line from the well to the men for the entire hour and 40 minutes, because that was the work that needed doing, and she had done it without being asked and without stopping. She looked at the burned ground. She said, "That didn't start itself." "No," he said, "it didn't." Ramon Vasquez came and stood beside them. He looked at the burned line. He looked at the direction the fire had come from, which was the northwest property edge where the Grayson Range began. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Ethan said, "I need a witness." Ramon said, "I'm here." Ethan walked the northwest edge of the burned area. He went past the fire line into the unburned grass near the property boundary. He crouched down. He looked at what was there. He did not touch it. He looked at it and memorized it, and then he looked up at Ramon. "Come here," he said. Ramon came. He crouched beside Ethan. He looked. There was a clear starting point. Not a lightning strike, which left a different signature. Not a carelessly abandoned fire, which spread from the center. This had been started at the edge of the Grayson property line and encouraged toward the Caldwell Ranch. The grass was disturbed in a specific direction. And there was something else. A short piece of burlap scorched at one end. The kind of thing you soaked in something and used to get a fire started fast enough that the wind could do the rest. Ramon straightened up slowly. He said, "I see it." "You'll say what you saw," Ethan said. "To whoever needs to hear it," Ramon said. They walked back to where Clara was standing. She had watched them cross the field. She had seen their faces when they came back. She said, "How bad is it?" Ethan said, "Bad enough." He paused. "Good enough." She looked at him. He said, "He made a mistake, Grayson. A man who is careful does not do something this direct. This is the act of someone who is running out of patience. Running out of patience means running out of options." She said slowly, "He's trying to force your hand." "I expected the fire to take the enclosure fence," Ethan said. "The 6 steers get out into the main herd. Best case for him, the illness spreads. Worst case for me, I lose the herd and the money to fight the water claim and the will to keep fighting at all." He looked at the burned line. He expected this to finish it. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "But it didn't." "No," Ethan said. "It didn't." She said, "Because I was awake." He looked at her. She said it without pride, just as the plain fact of it. She had been awake because she had not slept well since Cheyenne, and she had smelled it because she had been lying awake listening to the night, and she had been in the hallway before he was out of his room, and none of that was luck. It was presence. He said yes because you were awake. Ramon looked between them. He said, "I'll have my men ride the property line at first light. See if there's anything else worth seeing before the morning erases it." "Thank you," Ethan said. Ramon nodded and went to his men. Ethan looked at Clara. She had soot on her cheekbone, and she was tired in a way that showed not weakness, but the specific gravity of someone who had been running on something harder than sleep for several weeks. He looked at her, and something happened in his chest that was not the thing he had been carefully not naming, or rather, it was that thing, and he was done not naming it. He said, "Come inside." She came inside. He made coffee because she had been making it every morning, and he knew how she took it now. No sugar, just enough of it to be strong without being punishing. He set it in front of her, and she wrapped both hands around the cup, and he sat across from her. The kitchen was quiet. He said, "We need to go to the sheriff." She said, "Crane will say there's no proof it was Grayson's men." "There's the burlap," he said. "It's suggestive," she said. "Not conclusive. Ramon Vasquez's testimony puts the start point on the Grayson property line. Grayson say it was dry grass and an unlucky spark. And the Patterson situation. The land office clerk who told Grayson about the survey gap. She looked at him over her cup. That's harder to prove without Patterson saying something he won't say voluntarily. She set the cup down. But he waited. She said, "There is something I have been thinking about since Cheyenne, since Crane came to my boarding house." She met his eyes. He knew too much. He knew about my father's debt, specifically not just that there was a debt, but the merchant's name, the amount, the discharge date. That information is in the St. Louis County records. It's not the kind of thing you find quickly unless you have been preparing. Ethan said, "He's had someone looking into you." "Before I ever arrived," she said. "The advertisement was in the matrimonial register for several weeks before I responded. Grayson may have known about the arrangement before I got on the train." The kitchen was very quiet. Ethan said, "He's been planning this since before you arrived." "Since before I arrived," she confirmed. "Which means he knew the arrangement was real or real enough, and he wanted to make sure I was the kind of person he could use to discredit you." She paused. A woman with a deceased father's debts and no family standing. A woman the town already doubted. If he could make me look like a fraud or a liability, it would affect your credibility at the land office. Ethan sat back. He said, "He has been 3 steps ahead of me for 3 years." "He has been," she said. "But he is no longer 3 steps ahead of us." That word, us. She had said it before. In the account books, in the ledger planning, in the conversations about the cattle. But this time, it landed differently in the particular way that a word lands when it stops being practical and starts being something more. He said, "Clara." She looked at him. He said, "I want to take this to the territorial court." She blinked. "The fire. The fire and the water claim and Patterson and all of it," he said. "Not just the sheriff. The sheriff handles individual incidents. The territorial court sees patterns. Grayson has been running a pattern against this land for 3 years, and I have been treating each piece of it like it was its own problem." She was already thinking. He could see it. "You'd need documentation of every incident. The debt rumors last year, the water filing, the fire, the Cheyenne interference. I have documentation," he said, "or I can get it." She looked at him. "You have been keeping records." "You inspired me," he said. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. The thing that lived next to a smile, when a smile would be too small for what was actually happening. She said, "Who at the territorial court do you trust?" He said, "Judge Arthur Pembroke. He was at my father's land purchase. He's old, but he's honest. He has no love for men who use land pressure as a business strategy." Clara said, "Can you get a letter to him?" Ethan said, "I can do better than a letter." He paused. "Margaret knows his wife." Clara looked at him. "Of course she does." He almost smiled. He went to find Margaret before the morning was fully underway. Margaret arrived in the ranch within 2 hours of his message reaching her, which meant she had been ready to come at a moment's notice, which meant she had been watching things more closely than she had let on. She came in, looked at Clara's soot-marked coat hanging by the door, looked at the burned line visible through the kitchen window, looked at Ethan and said, "Tell me everything." They told her. She listened without interrupting, which was not something Margaret did often, and the fact that she did it now meant she understood the weight of what she was hearing. When they finished, she was quiet for a moment. She said, "Arthur Pembroke is in Laramie through the end of the month." "Can you reach Mrs. Pembroke?" Ethan said. "I can reach her today," Margaret said. "I'll need a letter from you, official, stating the incidents and requesting a hearing." "Clara will draft it," Ethan said. Margaret looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ethan. He said, "You know the language better than I do. You know all of it, the water claim, the filing, the Cheyenne interference, the fire this morning." Clara said, "All right." She sat down at the table. She wrote for 40 minutes, while Ethan and Margaret talked, and the coffee went cold, and the morning came fully up outside. When she finished, she read it through once, made 2 corrections, and handed it to Ethan. He read it. It was the most complete, precise, and utterly devastating account of 3 years of calculated pressure against a single ranch that he had ever seen, assembled in 4 pages. It cited dates, amounts, names, and specific actions. It connected the water claim to the fire, to the Patterson situation, to the Cheyenne interference in a way that made the pattern visible as a pattern, not a series of bad luck. He looked up. She was watching him read. He said, "This is extraordinary." She said, "It's accurate. That's what makes it work." Margaret reached out and took the letter. She read it. Her expression did not change while she read, but her jaw got slightly tighter, which was Margaret's version of being deeply impressed and also deeply angry simultaneously. She said, "I'll have this to Mrs. Pembroke by tonight." She left. The house was quiet again. Ethan sat at the table across from Clara, and they looked at the letter for a moment, the copy she had kept. He said, "If Pembroke takes it, there will be a hearing. Grayson will know." "He already knows we're not going away," she said. "It will make things harder before it makes them better." "I know," she said. He said, "Are you—" He stopped, started again. "This is not what you signed on for. When you answered that advertisement, when you got on that train. This is not the life you thought you were coming to." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "What life did you think I was coming to?" He said, "A quieter one." She said, "I had a quiet life in St. Louis. I was very good at managing a quiet life, and I was disappearing inside of it." She looked at her hands on the table. "I did not come here looking for peace, Ethan. I came here looking for something that was worth building." She looked up. "This is worth building." The word sat in the kitchen between them. He said, "Even with all of this." She said, "Especially with all of this." He did not know what to do with the feeling that produced, so he did what he always did. When feeling outpaced his language, he went to work. But something had shifted. Something had been shifting slowly for 4 weeks, and the fire had accelerated it. The way fire accelerates most things, by burning away what was inessential and leaving only what was strong enough to survive the heat. 3 days later, Judge Pembroke's clerk sent a letter acknowledging receipt of the complaint and requesting a formal hearing in Laramie in 6 weeks. Ethan brought the letter to Clara in the garden, where she was staking the tomato plants that the Vasquez boy had told her about. They had gone in before the deadline, and they were growing. He held out the letter. She read it. She read it again. She set it down against her knee. She said, 6 weeks. 6 weeks, he said. She said, "We'll need to organize everything. Every piece of documentation, the survey copy, the water filing records, the fire, Ramon's testimony, the Cheyenne boarding house records showing Crane's visit." He said, "I know." She said, "It will be a significant amount of work." He said, "I know that too." She looked at him. He said, "Clara, we've been doing significant amounts of work since the day you arrived. I don't think either of us needs to pretend that's going to stop." She looked at the letter in her hands. She said, "When we go to that hearing, in Laramie, what are we to the court, to Pembroke?" He understood what she was asking. It was the thing they had been moving around for 4 weeks, the thing that was present in every quiet kitchen evening, and every shared ledger morning, and every moment she had taken his hand without calculating it, and every moment he had said something honest that he had not planned to say. He said, "What do you want to be?" She said quietly, "I want to be someone with standing. In this community, in this county. Someone whose testimony and whose documentation carries weight because her position is clear." He said, "And what else?" She looked at him. He said it plainly because he was a plain man, and she deserved plain. "I am not asking what the court needs, Clara. I am asking what you want." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I want to stop wondering if I'm temporary." Something in his chest, that specific hollowed place that had been filling slowly for 4 weeks, filled the rest of the way. He said, "You're not temporary." She held his eyes. He said, "You have not been temporary since the wagon, since you told me about Francis and your father and what you were actually asking for. I told myself I was waiting for certainty, but the truth is, I was afraid that wanting you to stay meant I was capable of losing something again. And I have been more afraid of loss than I have been capable of living." He stopped. He looked at her. "I would like you to marry me. Not for the court. Not for the hearing. Because you are not temporary, and I am done pretending that the reason I want you here is practical." Clara looked at him for a long time. She said, "You should know that I will continue to disagree with you about ranch decisions when I think you're wrong." He said, "I know." She said, "And I will keep the account books the way I keep them." He said, "I wouldn't want them any other way." She said, "And Frances, when she is able to come, I would want her to be welcome here." He said, "She can have the east room. It gets afternoon light." Clara looked at him. She said, "Yes." One word. He reached across and took her hand from where it was resting on the letter. She turned her hand and held his. They sat in the garden with the tomatoes staking up around them, and the morning moving through the property that they had spent 4 weeks fighting for together, and they did not say anything else for a while because there was nothing else that needed saying. The hearing was in 6 weeks. Grayson was not finished. But neither were they. And for the first time in 4 years, Ethan Caldwell sat in his own yard on a Tuesday morning in late August and did not feel like a man waiting for the next thing to fail. He felt like a man who had something worth protecting, and someone worth protecting it with. Which was, he thought, the difference between enduring a life and actually living one. He had not understood that difference until a woman in a faded blue dress stepped off a train in tears and refused to be sent away. And now that he understood it, he could not imagine going back to the version of himself that hadn't. The 6 weeks between the proposal and the Laramie hearing were the hardest and the most honest weeks of Ethan Caldwell's life. Not because things got worse. Because things got real in the way that only happens when a person stops protecting themselves from what they actually feel and starts living inside it instead. They married on a Saturday morning 3 weeks before the hearing in the Silver Creek Church with Margaret as witness, and Ramon Vasquez and his wife sitting in the front pew because Clara had asked them and because they had said yes without hesitating. The ceremony was short. The Reverend was a practical man who had married enough frontier couples to understand that brevity was not a lack of seriousness. It was often the opposite. Ethan stood at the front of that church in his good dark shirt, the one Margaret had ironed again, and he watched Clara come down the aisle in a dress that was not new, but had been altered with enough care that it looked like it had been made for this exact morning, and he thought about the platform. He thought about the moment he had almost stepped forward to say the speech he had rehearsed. He thought about how close it had come to going the other way, how was glad with a completeness he had no precise words for, that it hadn't. Clara reached him. She looked at him the way she looked at everything directly, without performance, with the full weight of her attention. He said quietly before the Reverend began, "You look..." She said, "Don't you dare say practical." He said, "I was going to say beautiful." She held his eyes for a moment. She said, "All right then." The Reverend began. They said what needed saying. Afterward in the churchyard. Margaret held Clara's hands and said nothing for a long moment, and then said, "I placed that advertisement because I was frightened for him. I did not know what I was actually doing." She looked at Clara steadily. "I know now, and I want you to know that I know." Clara said, "You were paying attention to someone you loved. That's not something to apologize for." Margaret looked at her son-in-law's wife and she said, "No, it isn't." She released her hands. "Now, we have a hearing to win." The preparation consumed the 3 weeks. Every evening at the kitchen table, which was now undeniably their kitchen table, not his with her sitting across from it, but theirs in the way that furniture becomes when 2 people have used it together long enough, they worked through the documentation. Ethan talked. Clara organized. She had a system for it that was almost architectural, each piece of evidence placed in relation to the others, so that the pattern was visible, not just as a list of incidents, but as a coherent argument. The water filing, the survey gap, the Patterson connection, the Cheyenne interference, the fire. Ramon's sworn statement, which Ramon had given at the sheriff's office, with the same deliberate, unhurried certainty with which he did everything. On the 2nd week, something arrived that neither of them expected. A letter from Hector Reyes. Ethan read it at the breakfast table and looked up. Clara said, "What?" He said, "Hector says he has documentation from 2 years ago, when the illness went through his herd. He lost cattle. He has always believed the illness was introduced deliberately, A sick animal moved onto his boundary pasture from the Grayson Range. He couldn't prove it then. He says if the territorial court is hearing a pattern complaint against Grayson, he wants to submit his records. Clara set down her coffee. She said, he wasn't the only one. Ethan looked at her. She said, if Grayson did it to Hector, he did it to others. Men who lost cattle and accepted it as bad luck because they had no framework for understanding it as something deliberate. She was already moving to the desk. We need to know who else. Who else has had pressure from Grayson in the past 3 years? Water disputes, unusual illness, debt rumors, sales that happened under circumstances that felt wrong but couldn't be proven. He said, that is a significant amount of ground to cover in 2 weeks. She said, then we start today. They started that morning. Ethan rode. Clara wrote letters. Between the two of them working from opposite ends, him in person, her through the mail. They contacted 11 ranchers in the county who had any history of conflict with Grayson's interests. 7 responded. Of the 7, 4 had documentation. Real documentation. Records, letters, sworn statements from workers who had left the Grayson Ranch and were willing to say what they had seen. The pattern that emerged was not subtle. Walter Grayson had been systematically weakening small and mid-sized ranches in the county for 6 years. Water disputes. Introduced illness. Strategic debt rumors that made it harder for struggling ranchers to get bank credit. Offers made at distressed prices that looked like generosity and were anything but. He had been building a land empire, one collapsed neighbor at a time, and each individual loss had looked like bad luck or bad management, and nobody had seen the whole shape of it, because nobody had been looking at the whole shape of it. Clara laid it all on the kitchen table on a Tuesday night 10 days before the hearing. She looked at it. She said, this is not a water dispute. Ethan said, no. She said, this is a conspiracy to defraud multiple landowners across an entire county. He said, yes. She said, Judge Pembroke needs to see all of it, not just our case, all of it. He said, that changes the scale of the hearing. She said, it changes the scale of everything. She looked at him across the table. Are you ready for that? He looked at the documents spread between them, years of other people's losses, finally visible as what they actually were. He said, I've been ready since the morning you found that water filing. She looked at him steadily. She said, then let's finish it. They arrived in Laramie 4 days before the hearing to give themselves time to prepare and to meet with Judge Pembroke's clerk, a precise young man named Aldrich, who took one look at the volume of documentation they had brought and said carefully, this is considerably more than the original complaint indicated. Clara said, the original complaint was accurate as of the date it was filed. We have since identified a broader pattern that we believe the court will want to consider. Aldrich looked at Ethan. Ethan said, she speaks for us both. Aldrich looked back at Clara. He said, I'll need to present this to Judge Pembroke before the hearing date. He may want to expand the scope of the proceedings. Clara said, we are prepared for that. Aldrich took the documentation. He came back the next morning. He said Judge Pembroke would like to meet with you both this afternoon. They met with Judge Pembroke in his chambers, a man in his late 60s, white-haired with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades listening carefully and had gotten very good at it. He had the documentation spread across his desk. He looked at it the way Clara looked at things steadily, thoroughly, without rushing to a conclusion. He looked up at them. He said, Mrs. Caldwell, you assembled this, Clara said, with my husband's knowledge of the county and the ranchers involved. We assembled it together. Pembroke looked at Ethan. Ethan said, she tells the truth, Your Honor. Pembroke looked at the documents again. He said, this extends well beyond the original water rights complaint. Clara said, yes, sir. He said, you understand that expanding the scope of this hearing will bring considerably more pressure on your household. Grayson has resources. He has legal representation. He will not accept this quietly. Clara said, with respect, Judge Pembroke, he has not been quiet for 6 years. He has simply been unobserved. She met the old judge's eyes. We are asking the court to observe. Pembroke looked at her for a long moment. He said, the hearing will be expanded. I'll be bringing in a second judge from Cheyenne. This will be a full territorial proceeding." He paused. "I trust you are prepared for what that means." Clara said, "We are." They left the chambers. In the hallway outside, Ethan stopped walking. Clara stopped beside him. He said, "You just told a territorial judge to observe something that 6 ranchers before me couldn't make anyone see." She said, "We told him." He said, "Clara." She looked at him. He said, "I need you to understand something." He said it carefully because it mattered, and he wanted to get it right. "When I was standing on that platform planning to send you away, I told myself it was kindness, that it was the right thing for both of us. But the truth is that I was protecting myself. I had decided that what I had already lost was enough loss, and that the only way to survive was to stop allowing anything in that could be taken." He looked at her. "And then you arrived, and you were not what I was afraid of. You were the thing I had stopped believing existed." She said very quietly, "What thing?" He said, "Someone who looks at what's hard and stays anyway. Not because they have no choice, because they chose." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You stayed too." He said, "Not at first." She said, "At first is not what counts. What counts is the fence post and the letter and Cheyenne and the fire and every morning after. That is what counts." She looked at him. "You stayed." He took her hand. She held it. They stood in the hallway outside a territorial judge's chambers, 2 days before a hearing that was going to change the shape of their county, and they held each other's hands, and neither of them said anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying. The hearing lasted 2 days. Grayson arrived with Crane and 2 additional lawyers, and the particular air of a man who believed that legal proceedings, like most things, were winnable by whoever spent the most on them. He looked across the courtroom at Ethan with the expression of a man who has underestimated something and knows it, and is not yet ready to admit it. He looked at Clara with something different, something that was close to the expression he had worn on the platform the day she arrived, but with the confidence drained out of it. She looked back at him the way she always looked at him, steady, clear, utterly unbothered. On the first day, Ramon Vasquez testified. He was precise and unembellished, and he described what he had seen on the burned property line without drama or exaggeration, which made it more effective than drama would have been. Hector Reyes testified about the illness and the sick animal he had found on his boundary fence, and he produced the records Clara had told him to keep 3 weeks ago when she had written him and said, "Keep everything right down, everything you remember, date it and sign it." He had done exactly that. 3 other ranchers testified. One of them, a man named Grover, who had sold his spread to Grayson 2 years ago at a price he had always felt wrong about, stood up in that courtroom and said, "I was told by 2 separate people that my water rights were compromised. I believed them because they seemed to have documentation. I sold because I thought I had no choice. I know now that the documentation was false. I would like the court to understand what that cost my family," Crane objected. Judge Pembroke overruled him. Grayson's jaw tightened. On the second day Clara was called. She walked to the front of that courtroom in the same steady, unhurried way she walked into every room she had ever entered, and she sat down, and she looked at the 2 judges with the same directness she brought to everything, and she answered every question Ethan's lawyer asked with the precision of someone who had been preparing for this for weeks. Because that was what she did. She prepared, she documented, she remembered, she built. When Crane cross-examined her, he tried 3 separate approaches. He tried to question her credibility by referencing her father's debts. Judge Pembroke stopped him before he had finished the second sentence and said that a discharged estate debt was not relevant to the testimony of a witness in a land fraud proceeding. He tried to suggest that she had manipulated her husband into pursuing litigation that was not in his best interests. Ethan, sitting at the table, said quietly but audibly, "That's not true." His lawyer put a hand on his arm. He did not apologize. He tried to suggest that the documentation she had assembled was selective and incomplete. She said, "I am happy to walk the court through every document I did not include, and the specific reason each one was excluded. It will take approximately 2 hours. I have the list." Crane said nothing. Judge Pembroke made a sound that was not quite a laugh. When she came back to sit beside Ethan, he said under his breath, 2 hours. She said, "I had the list." He said, "I know you had the list." She said, "He didn't know that." He looked at her. He said, "No, he didn't." The verdict came on the third morning. Judge Pembroke read it with the measured pace of a man who understood that what he was saying would be lived with for a long time by the people in this room, and who gave it the weight it deserved. The Caldwell water rights were confirmed in full. The preliminary claim filed by Grayson Cattle Company was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could not be refiled. The pattern of land pressure identified across 7 ranches was referred to the Territorial Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Patterson, the land office clerk, was placed on administrative suspension pending that investigation. The sale made by Grover 2 years prior was referred for review of potential fraud. Walter Grayson sat very still through all of it. When it was done, he stood up. He looked at Ethan across the courtroom. He did not say anything. He looked at Clara. She held his gaze without expression, without triumph, without anything except the same clear, steady attention she had given him on the platform the day she arrived, when he had told the whole town she wouldn't last a month. He looked away first. He walked out. Crane followed him. The room exhaled. Margaret, who had come to Laramie and sat in the gallery for both days of the hearing, came down and put her arms around Clara in the particular way that Margaret expressed things she could not quite say, which was fully and without reservation, and for longer than was strictly practical. Clara held on. When Margaret stepped back, her eyes were bright. She said, "Your father would have been proud of you." Clara said, "I hope so." Margaret said, "I'm proud of you. And I was there. So I know." Hector Reyes shook Ethan's hand, and then Clara's, and he said, "The tomatoes are going to be excellent this year," which was not about tomatoes at all, and everyone in that small circle knew it. Ramon Vasquez said nothing. He looked at what had been accomplished in that courtroom, and he nodded once with the slow deliberateness of a man who had seen enough of the world to know when something has been done exactly right. They drove back to Silver Creek in 2 days. The ranch looked different when they came up the drive on the evening of the second day. Not physically different. The same house, the same barn, the same fence line. The Vasquez brothers had rebuilt solid and straight. But different the way places look different when you come back to them after something has changed, when you are seeing them with the eyes of a person who knows now what they are worth and what they nearly weren't. Clara stood in the yard. She looked at the house. She looked at the garden, which had grown considerably in the time they had been away, and would need attention tomorrow morning, which she was already thinking about. Ethan stood beside her. He said, "There's something I should have said a long time ago." She looked at him. He said, "The morning after you arrived, when I found you at the kitchen table with the ledgers before I was out of bed. I thought this woman is going to change everything." He paused. "I was afraid of that, for exactly 1 more day, and then I stopped being afraid of it, and I never went back." She said, "You could have told me." He said, "I'm telling you now." She said, "You are not the most efficient communicator." He said, "No." She said, "I'm aware of that. I've adjusted." He said, "I know you have." She looked at the house again. She said, "Francis arrives next month." "East room," he said. "Afternoon light." She said, "She's going to have opinions about the garden." He said, "She can have them, as long as the tomatoes go in before the first frost." Clara looked at him. He looked at her, and there it was, the thing that had been building since a platform in July, since a wagon road and a hawk on a thermal, and a kitchen table at 6 in the morning, and a letter to a land office, and a fire in the dark, and a hearing in Laramie. The thing that had no single moment, it had become itself, because it had been becoming itself in every moment, in every hard morning, and every shared evening, and every problem they had looked at together and refused to leave unsolved. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw, the way you touch something you have decided is yours. He put his hand over hers. They stood in the yard of the Caldwell Ranch, their ranch on their land, with their water rights confirmed, and their fence solid, and their cattle recovering in the north pasture, and tomatoes growing in the kitchen garden that had once been Anna's and was now Clara's, and would one day be Francis's, and the evening came in around them with the particular golden weight of late summer in Wyoming, and neither of them moved. Silver Creek did not whisper about the woman who arrived by train anymore. They spoke about the Caldwells, about the hearing in Laramie, and what it had meant for every small rancher in the county who had been slowly losing ground to a man with more money and less conscience. They spoke about the investigation that was still unfolding, that would take more than a year and result in consequences for Grayson, that even Ethan, who had reason to want them, thought were sufficient rather than satisfying. They spoke about the woman who had come from St. Louis with a worn suitcase and a family Bible, and had turned out to know more about land law and cattle illness and kitchen gardens, and the specific architecture of what makes a ranch survive than anyone had expected. They stopped being surprised by her eventually. That was the highest form of respect Silver Creek knew how to give. Frances arrived in September, 17 years old and thin and quiet, in the specific way of a person who has been through something and is not sure yet if the new place is safe enough to stop being quiet. She came off the train, and Clara was on the platform, and Frances looked at her sister, and her composure lasted approximately 4 seconds before it didn't. Clara held her. She held her for a long time right there on the platform in full view of whoever was watching. Ethan stood back. He watched Clara hold her sister, and he thought about the platform in July and the woman in the faded blue dress who had been crying on the train and had wiped the tears away before she stepped off because she had decided what kind of arrival she was going to have. He thought about everything she had done since, everything she had built, everything she had fought for and won and documented and refused to let go of. He thought about the speech he had never given. How was grateful in a way he had no adequate words for that he had never given it. Frances looked up from her sister's shoulder. She looked at Ethan. She said, "You're the rancher." He said, "I am." She said, "Clara says you're not easy to live with." He said, "That's accurate." Frances said, "She says she's not easy to live with either." He said, "That's also accurate." Frances considered this for a moment, with the seriousness of someone conducting an actual assessment. Then she said, "She seems happy." Ethan looked at Clara, who was looking back at him with the expression that lived near a smile, and was better for not being one yet. He said, "I think she is." Frances said, "Good." She picked up her bag. "She deserves to be." He thought about that walking back to the wagon. He thought about what Clara deserved and what she had built and what she had refused to accept less than. He thought about the version of this story that could have happened, the one where he gave the speech on the wagon road and she took the evening train back east and the ranch continued its slow contraction and Grayson got the water claim and the south pasture and eventually all of it. He thought about how close that version had been, and then he stopped thinking about it because it hadn't happened. What had happened was this. A woman stepped off a train in tears and refused to be sent away, and a man who had forgotten how to want things remembered, and together they built something that neither of them could have built alone. And the building of it was the point, not the having of it, and they both understood that, which was why it held. Ethan Caldwell had spent 4 years building walls around everything he was afraid to lose. Clara Bennett had arrived with one suitcase and taken those walls apart one fence post at a time, not by force, not by strategy, but by simply being exactly what she was, honest and capable and present and unwilling to be anything less than fully herself in a life she had chosen. She had not saved him. She had done something harder than that. She had stayed beside him while he saved himself, and that was the difference between being rescued and being accompanied, between someone who fixes a broken thing and someone who works alongside it until it remembers how to hold together on its own. The Caldwell Ranch stood. It would stand for years after this, through good seasons and hard ones, through Frances growing up, and eventually building her own life through Margaret, getting older and coming to dinner every Sunday and arguing with Clara about the garden in the comfortable way of two women who respect each other completely through cattle years that were good and years that required everything they had. It stood because two people had decided separately and then together that it was worth standing for. And some mornings in the particular quiet before the ranch woke up, Ethan would come into the kitchen and find Clara already there, coffee on ledger, open, boots on mind, already 3 steps into the day, and he would stand in the doorway for just a moment before she heard him, and he would think about the train platform and the worn suitcase and the 900 miles she had traveled on a promise. And he would think she came here a stranger, and she became without fanfare or announcement the truest thing about his life. That was not something he had planned for. It was something he had been given by his own stubbornness in spite of himself, and by her refusal to be anything less than exactly who she was, and by the particular grace of a moment on a train platform when he forgot the speech he had prepared and did the right thing instead. She was not the woman he had expected. She was the woman who made everything he thought he knew about himself turn out to be smaller than what he actually was. And the house that had been silent for 4 years, that had held his grief like a closed room. Hold's cold air was not silent anymore. It was full of early mornings and honest arguments and ledger books and the smell of good coffee and the sound of Francis laughing in the East Room, and Margaret's real laugh from the front porch on Sundays, and the particular irreplaceable sound of a life being lived inside walls that had finally been opened to let it in. Some people arrive in your life like weather expected passing, leaving you mostly unchanged. And some people step off a train in tears with a worn suitcase and a Bible, and 3 weeks of plan in their head, and a refusal to be temporary, and they become, without either of you quite noticing the moment it happened, the reason a house finally feels like home.